Let's calculate a weighted average from a bar graph or a histogram. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about a bar graph. You'll notice the bars are not touching. Therefore, we have discrete data, and we are going to calculate the weighted average. Now, I highly recommend staying organized, and by doing that, it keeps the numbers, straight. You don't have to worry about what did I already do. So I like to make a table. So first I'm going to have an X value for the values I'm dealing with. Okay, so and I want to have the frequency. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with the X value and the frequency. So you'll notice across my horizontal axis, 5 through 9, those are my X values. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 under my X. Now for my frequency, I need to look at each one of these bars. So 5 has a height of, looks like 4. So we can see the interval going up that goes by 2. So 5 has a frequency of 4. 6 has a frequency of 10. 7 has a frequency of 8. 8 has a frequency of 2. And 9 has a frequency of 14. Now, what this means, this basically means that the number 5 having a frequency of 4 means that we would see the number 5 4 times if we were to write these all out. But you can see we have quite a few numbers in our frequency. To write those all out would be very painful, which is why we can use this table feature. Now, our next step is going to be to multiply X times the frequency. We're doing that because, as we mentioned, if we have 5 written down 4 times, that's the same as having 20 total value, right? Because 5 times 4 is 20. So multiplying these just says, let's just figure out how much value we have, which each of our x's. So 5 times 4 is 20. 6 times 10 is 60. 7 times 8 is 56. 8 times 2 is 16. And 9 times 14 is 126. Okay, so the x in frequency was step number 1. Multiply the X times the frequency is step number 2. Step number 3, we want to add these all together. So I want to sum up the X times frequency. So this is the part with the average where you add all of your numbers together. This tells us our total number of values. So we have 278 when we add all of those, 20 plus 60 plus 56 plus 16 plus 126. Now that we have the sum, step 3, we want to make sure we add all of the frequencies. So, okay, let's do that. So if I add all of the frequencies, the sum, 4 plus 10 plus 8 plus 2 plus 14 is 38. So that was step 4. The final step is to think about the idea of an average. We take the sum of all of the numbers and we divide by how many numbers we have. Well, that's what the frequency tells us. It tells us how many numbers we have. So our 5th and final step is taking 278 divided by 38, and that gives us approximately 7.32, rounding to the nearest hundredth. All right, so that's the idea of a bar graph. I highly recommend you make a table, keeps things nice and organized, and you can go through your 5 steps. So now let's think about histograms. How does this change if the bars touch? Well, generally, histograms have intervals. So whereas with a bar graph, we have a value of 5 for this bar, but with histograms, we often have, well, this bar is 10 to 20. So we have to find the midpoint. We want to know what is the value in the middle, and that's what we're going to use as our X value. So let's put this into practice. Our intervals here go from 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. But you can see, other than that, the idea is the same. So when we create our table with a histogram, we want to use the midpoint as our X value. So we're going to use the midpoint and the frequency. That's how we're going to start our table. And if you're thinking, well, I don't remember how to find the midpoint, that's fine. The midpoint is simply the average of the upper and lower ends of the interval. So the average is, we would add these two numbers together, 10 plus 20 is 30, and divide by 2. So the midpoint of our first bar is 15, and the frequency of that is 5. Okay, let's go to the next bar. So now we're finding the average of 20 and 30. Well, 20 plus 30 is 50, divide by 2 is 25. So that midpoint is 25, the frequency is 15. Okay, so now let's go to the average of 30 and 40. 70 divided by 2 is 35. And you might be seeing a pattern. That frequency is 10. And then the last one, the average of 40 and 50 is going to be 45 with a frequency of 25. Now it is exactly the same. From here on out, it's exactly the same as a bar graph. So we're going to do the midpoint times the frequency, right? So we had step one. Well, step one is find the midpoint and creating your thing. So step two is multiplying your midpoint times the frequency. So 15 times 5 is 75. 25 times 15 is 375. 35 times 10 is 350. And 45 times 25 is 1125. So now we add all of these together. So step 3, add these together, and we get 1925. 75 plus 375 plus 350 plus 1125 gives us 1925. Now we want to add up all of the frequency. 5 plus 15 plus 10 plus 25 gives me 55. That's step 4. And then finally, step 5 is to divide the sum of midpoint times frequency of 1925 divided by the total frequency of 55. And that comes out nicely that our weighted average is 35. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense. This one is the biggest bar, and it kind of averages out with all these little guys. So you can see finding the weighted average with bar graphs and histograms, very similar. The only difference, that first step when you are using the midpoint instead of just the given X value.